Welcome! This is the long-awaited continuation to my first video, What if the Sixth Affair succeeded? For those who haven't seen it, here's some brief context. The Sixth Affair was a set of secret negotiations during World War I that took place between France and Austria, with the eventual goal being for the latter to make peace with the Entente. In our timeline, this attempt resulted in failure, due to many reasons, including lack of communication, extremely vague terms of peace, and various other factors. In that video then, I explored the first 2 decades of a timeline where these negotiations went through, and Austria successfully exited World War I, betraying the German Empire in the process. With this diplomatic success, the Provisional Government of Russia, that deposed the Tsarist regime in the February Revolution, was able to paint this as a Russian victory over Austria, greatly boosting their popularity, which led to the subsequent October Revolution never taking place. As such, when Germany would eventually surrender, the post-war world would end up being very different in comparison to our own. Russia would still exist and would not have turned into the USSR, which had as a result Germany losing a whole less territory in the east than in our timeline. Meanwhile, in the south, Italy has gained Dalmatia, and some people have pointed out that this would be enough to prevent an ultra-nationalist takeover of the country. However, I highly doubt so. Though yes, the mutilated victory is reversed, with Italy gaining the lands it was promised, the economy post-war would still suffer, and the addition of Dalmatia wouldn't really change that. Fast forwarding a few years later, and the Great Depression strikes Europe in much the same way. Italy and Germany would become ultra-nationalist dictatorships and would formally sign an alliance between themselves. Russia then would have a similar trajectory, as the territory they gained wouldn't be much in comparison to the other great powers. Finland would break off due to the abdication of Tsar Nicholas, and most crucially, they never would end up gaining Constantinople, as the British insisted on turning the city into an international zone. Shifting back to Central Europe, the Germans especially would be extremely bitter about the Austrian betrayal and would distance themselves from them, doubling down on their Prussian identity. As for Austria itself, they would find themselves ruled by Karl I, the reform-minded king. Quickly he would move to turn the dual monarchy into a tri-monarchy, with the third crown going to the Slavs of the empire. However, though his efforts would be successful in Bohemia, Slovakia would be much more difficult to include in this new Slavic kingdom, as the Hungarian portion of the empire would not be willing to give up territory they consider rightfully theirs away. That just about covers the original video. Of course, if you want to see more details, be sure to watch the original one first before continuing. But without further ado, let's finally dive into the continuation. The year is 1937 and the tripartite pact is signed between Germany, Italy and Russia, as the three countries realize the sheer potential this grand alliance holds. However, from the very beginning, Germany knows this alliance is very temporary, as their fundamental plan of Lebensraum is still present in this timeline. It's also possible that during this time, China also joins the Axis. Historically, Germany at first had friendly relations with both the Chinese and the Japanese, only to later decide to join forces with the latter. On the contrary, in this timeline, the Germans are allied with the Russians, which have their own ambitions in Manchuria and Korea, currently held by the Japanese, and as such, it would be beneficial to have another ally against them in the form of China. Going back west, Germany and Russia would begin preparations for the invasion of the Habsburg Empire. France and Britain, not hoping to start a war yet, would meet with the Axis members in Munich, aiming to strike a comprehensive agreement with them. There, Germany would end up demanding way too much, requesting the complete dissolution of the Austrian Empire, something that the Allies could not accept, and as a result, Germany would declare war on Austria in early 1938. Now, should Germany actually push this to a full-blown war, their chances of victory are pretty minute. By 1938 in our timeline, the German economy was on the brink of bankruptcy due to all the money the government had been putting on the remilitarization effort. The annexation of Austria, the invasion of Czechoslovakia, and the gold these countries provided had temporarily saved the economy from complete collapse. With this added boost, the Germans were able to conquer Poland, Denmark and Norway, and even managed to break France, further helping to maintain the war effort. However, in this timeline, Germany has to face a war with the nation of approximately 32 million people, which is about a third of its total population. Furthermore, the Germans would be unprepared for such war, and the mountainous terrain of Austria and Bohemia would make it really difficult to make progress on the battlefield. Lastly, on top of that, unlike our timeline, the Austrian population would be hostile to the German invader, as most of them would be willing to fight for their empire at all costs. But Germany does hold a major advantage. Austria is surrounded by German allies, and even Yugoslavia and Romania, who would normally lean towards the allies, wouldn't mind seeing the empire disappear. Even this though doesn't really mean much, as Italy and Russia have both gotten their desired territory from Austria and are now looking to expand their influence in the Balkans and Asia respectively. Regardless, Germany begins the invasion, which results in France and Britain also declaring war on the German Reich. Quickly, the German army would move to occupy a large part of the Austrian heartland, but they'd see major difficulty in pushing through the Bohemian mountains. In the west, France and Britain would sit idly by, instead preparing for a trench warfare similar to that of World War I. As a result, this would allow for early war gains in favor of Germany, which would prove extremely useful as Russia, sensing weakness, would finally join the war fully, hoping to expand their influence in Slovakia and Hungary. The reality soon reveals itself. Austria, though a regional power at best, cannot hope to fight a two-front war, and their situation would worsen even further, as Romania would also join the Axis around this time, with the aim of finally uniting with Transylvania in fall. As the German armies march into Vienna, the Russian ones into Budapest and the Romanian ones into Transylvania, Austria would be forced to surrender, with its lands being divided amongst the Axis nations. However, cracks are already showing in the German economy, and their situation is only deteriorating from there. Now, if you're expecting some kind of Dunkirk to take place in this timeline, resulting in an Axis victory in Europe, then I'm sorry to inform you, but I doubt this is happening. Germany is in such a desperate place right now that a full-out invasion of France would simply be impossible at the moment. The Allies of course have expected this, and they know full well that they can starve out the German economy if they just wait long enough. But before we continue, did you know that a large percentage of you guys who watch my content are actually not subscribed? So if you enjoy the content thus far, consider subscribing. It's one button and it really comes a long way. Anyways, let's get back with the video. Over in the east, let's set our sights to Asia for a bit. At this point, Japan would have begun their invasion of China, and the Russians are secretly making war preparations to strike the Japanese. But Russia does hold a major disadvantage. In our timeline, after the October Revolution and the Bolshevik victory in the Civil War, Stalin rose to power in the Union, and despite all his flaws, he forced rapid industrialization, turning Russia into an extremely powerful nation. Here, however, Russia finds itself ruled by the ultranationalists, who are unlikely to produce a figure similar to him. As a result, industrialization is a lot slower, and Russia's economy is a lot more agricultural, which is terrible at the present moment. Russia, in their delusional lust for power, would declare war on Japan in early 1939, and it would would go just as well as you might expect. The Japanese would possess the early war advantage, managing to defeat Russia in most crucial battles. Despite that, the Russian move would prove to be catastrophic for the Japanese war effort, as originally, the Japanese intended to strike against the Western powers down south. Instead, now they have to commit forces to the Russian front, something they are not so willing to do. Shifting focus back to Europe, Germany at this point is in a dire situation. Their economy has reached a breaking point and they are beginning to face enormous resource shortages. To further add to that, due to Germany's weakened state, an invasion of Denmark and Norway was never executed, hurting the economy and their war capabilities even more. By late 1939 to early 1940, I expect the Germans, in a desperate move, to attempt to conquer France by invading through the Low Countries. But that would quickly turn sour as the French and the British would stop the Germans in their tracks, and trench warfare would set in. This would be the nail in the coffin for Germany, as they cannot sustain a long-term war by any means. Soon, the French would turn the tide of the war and begin to chase down the retreating German army, as the government collapses and Germany unconditionally surrenders to the Allies. Whether Russia also decides to end the war with the West remains up in the air, but I personally think that neither the Allies nor the Russians would want to continue fighting, so a negotiated peace would eventually take place between the two factions. With the war over in Europe, Russia can now turn their full attention to the Japanese. Japan, similar to Germany, would also face resource shortages, and without the rapid conquest of Southeast Asia, their situation is only deteriorating. Slowly, the Russo-Chinese force would score some major victories, and after Japan is kicked from the Asian mainland, they'd also suit for peace. In the aftermath of the Asian theater, Russia annexes Sakhalin and sets up a puppet regime in power in Korea. China, for their part, would gain Taiwan, and after they defeat their communist rebels, would officially ally themselves to the Russians, securing East Asia for the Russian sphere of influence. But that's enough Asian talk. Let's return back to Europe, where the real peace deals are to be had. To start off with, Russian gains are recognized, with Slovakia, Hungary and Romania falling under their direct influence. Germany, meanwhile, would suffer the worst fate, with its territory being reduced from all sides. France annexes the Saar and possibly sets up a protectorate in the Rhineland, while Austria is recreated and even expanded to include southern Germany, Bohemia and Silesia. Overall, this war would have been a lot less bloody and would have been done a lot quicker. The results of the conflict also result in the rise of an ultra-nationalist Russian state, which would undoubtedly seek to ally itself with Italy and Spain to combat against the Western powers, as a Cold War sets in. But as this video is getting too long and the scenario too unrealistic, I would like to leave the continuation here for these reasons. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a like, subscribe and comment below what you thought of the video. And as always, if you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below and don't forget to join the Discord. But for now, have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.